For a very long time, I didn't have standards or boundaries, at least not ones I honored. I would have told you I was flexible, easygoing, understanding. But if I'm honest, a lot of that flexibility came from wanting approval, wanting to be accepted, not wanting to be the odd man out. And the truth is, I was often resentful, not at other people, but at myself. I didn't speak up when I should have. I didn't say no when I needed to. I stayed quiet even when I was the one getting the short end of the stick. I would reason it out. It won't be that bad. I can handle it. I'll deal with it later. But later always came with regret and anger and that heavy feeling of knowing I had once again put myself in a compromised position just to keep someone else comfortable. I didn't want to hurt anyone. I didn't want to disappoint anyone. But in trying not to hurt someone else, I kept hurting myself. And eventually you reach a point where something shifts. You realize, this is my life. These are my feelings. These are my mistakes to carry. And if I keep choosing silence over self-respect, I'm the one who pays for it. There comes a moment where you quietly decide, enough. Not in anger, not rebellion, just clarity. I matter in this situation because I'm the one who has to live with the consequences. And when that switch flips, something interesting happens. The road in front of you changes. You start to see how not to keep hurting yourself. That's when you begin to understand what standards and boundaries really are all about. Most people struggle with boundaries not because they don't know what to say, but because they don't fully understand what boundaries are protecting in the first place. Boundaries aren't rules you use on other people. They're not walls. They're not about control. They're part of a system, and when you don't understand that system, you end up either overgiving, over-explaining, or quietly abandoning yourself over time. Here's the simplest way to think about it. Standards are what you value about yourself. Boundaries are how you protect them. And self-trust is what allows you to actually use them when it matters. If any one of those is missing, the whole system breaks down. Most people never learn this because no one breaks it down this way. We're told to set boundaries, but no one explains what they're protecting. We're told to trust ourselves, but no one shows us how that trust is built. So people end up thinking that they're bad at boundaries when really they were never shown the system behind them. Here are 7 understandings of standards, boundaries, and self-trust a lot of people are unclear on. Number 1, standards are internal. They are what you value about yourself. Standards aren't about the other people. They are not demands. They're not expectations you place on the world. Standards are internal. They're what you value about yourself, how you want to be treated, how you want to live, and what you're no longer willing to tolerate because you've learned what it costs you. Most people don't struggle because their standards are too high. They struggle because they've never clearly named them. When you haven't defined what matters to you, it's easy to drift into situations that slowly erode your self-respect. Not dramatically, quietly. One small compromise at a time. Standards answer simple questions. How do I want to be treated? What environments help me function well? What consistently drains me? Until those questions are answered, boundaries won't hold because you don't know what you're protecting yet. You can often tell when someone doesn't have clear standards because they feel confused a lot. They go back and forth. They second-guess themselves. Something feels off, but they can't explain why. So they keep adjusting instead. Not because they're weak, but because they haven't named what matters to them yet. Standards show up in everyday moments. How you expect to be spoken to. How much effort you're willing to give without it being returned. Whether you feel comfortable being yourself around someone or feel pressured to perform, impress, or stay quiet. These aren't dramatic decisions. They're quiet ones that repeat over time. When standards aren't clear, people often mistake discomfort for being too sensitive or making a big deal out of nothing. But discomfort is usually a signal that something doesn't align with how you want to live. Standards give that feeling a name. They turn vague unease into information. This is why standards come before boundaries. You can't protect what you haven't defined. If you don't know what drains you, disrespects you, or pulls you away from yourself, You won't recognize when it's happening, and you'll keep adapting instead of responding. Clear standards don't make you rigid. They make you consistent. They help you recognize situations that work for you and those that don't, without needing to justify yourself or convince anyone else. And when standards are clear, boundaries stop feeling like confrontation. They start feeling like self-respect in action. Number 2, boundaries are external, and they are how you protect your standards. Boundaries aren't about controlling people. They are how you manage access to your time, energy, and presence so your standards don't get worn down. Once standards are clear, boundaries become much simpler. Boundaries aren't about convincing people to respect you. They are about deciding what you will do when something crosses the line. That decision lives with you, not with anyone else. A lot of people think boundaries only count if they're announced. In reality, most boundaries are silent. They're choices about how long you stay, how much you share, how quickly you respond, or whether you keep engaging at all. You don't have to explain a boundary for it to be real. A boundary might look like saying no. It might look like leaving a situation earlier than you used to. It might look like not explaining yourself anymore. Boundaries are decisions you make consistently, not speeches you give once. Boundaries often show up around access. Access to your time, access to your energy, access to your personal life, thoughts, and emotions. When someone asks for more than you're comfortable giving, more attention, more information, more availability, that's not automatically wrong, but it is a moment where a boundary might be needed. This is where people get confused. They think setting a boundary means rejecting someone. Most of the time, it doesn't. It simply means adjusting how much access someone has. You can care about someone and still limit what you share. You can like someone and still say no. Boundaries don't cancel connection, they shape it. When people say boundaries are hard, what they usually mean is that the boundaries feel uncomfortable. That discomfort doesn't mean the boundary is wrong. It means you're no longer doing what you used to do to keep things smooth at your own expense. Boundaries often feel worse at first because they disrupt familiar patterns, especially unhealthy ones. When boundaries are missing, people tend to overgive first and resent later. They say yes when they mean no. They stay longer than they want to. They answer questions they don't want to answer. Over time, this doesn't build closeness, it creates exhaustion. And at their core, boundaries are not about control. They're about self-respect. They help you live the life you're trying to experience instead of constantly reacting to what others expect from you. Number 3, why standards without boundaries create resentment. When you have standards but no boundaries, life slowly teaches you a very painful lesson. You start noticing when something feels off, but you don't act on it. You tell yourself it's not a big deal. You explain things away. Over time, that gap between what you value and what you allow turns into resentment. Resentment isn't about other people. It's about self-betrayal. It is the emotional cost of knowing better and repeatedly choosing silence over self-respect. This is why people feel drained, irritable, or disconnected without always knowing why. They're living in a way that conflicts with their own standards, and that friction adds up. This is why resentment often feels confusing. People think it means they're ungrateful, dramatic, or unfair. In reality, resentment is information. It's a signal that you've been asking yourself to carry something you don't actually want to carry anymore. Resentment also builds quietly. It doesn't usually show up the first time you say yes when you mean no. It shows up after the 10th time, after you've stayed longer than you wanted to, after you've listened when you were already empty, after you've given access you weren't comfortable giving, just to keep things smooth. What makes resentment dangerous isn't the feeling itself, it's what happens next. People either turn that resentment inward and feel guilty or numb, or they let it leak out sideways through sarcasm, irritation, or emotional distance. Either way, the relationship suffers, not because of what was said, but because of what was avoided. Boundaries prevent resentment because you stop self-betrayal early. They allow you to respond while the cost is still small, instead of waiting until the weight is heavy. You don't need to be angry to set a boundary. You need to be attentive. When standards and boundaries work together, resentment doesn't have much room to grow. You still notice discomfort, but you act sooner. And acting sooner protects both you and the relationship, because unspoken resentment always costs more than a clear boundary ever does. Number 4, why boundaries without standards feel rigid or controlling. On the other side, some people try to set boundaries without clear standards. That's when boundaries start to feel harsh, defensive, or confusing. If you don't know why a boundary exists, it can feel arbitrary to you and to others. But when boundaries are grounded in clear standards, they feel calmer. They make sense. You don't have to justify them constantly because you understand them internally. But without clear standards, boundaries often sound like rules instead of decisions. They feel sudden. They feel inconsistent. One day something is fine. The next day it isn't. And even you're not quite sure why. That's not clarity. That's uncertainty showing up as control. This is why some boundaries collapse quickly under pressure. If you don't understand why a boundary exists, it's hard to hold it when someone questions it, pushes back, or acts disappointed. You start second-guessing yourself because the boundary doesn't have a standard to back it up. It feels reactive. Boundaries without standards can also turn inward. Instead of adjusting your own behavior, you start focusing on changing someone else's. What they should do, how they should respond, what would make things easier. That's not because you're trying to control people. It's because, without clear standards, you don't know how else to reduce the discomfort. When boundaries are rooted in standards, they feel calmer. You don't need perfect wording. You don't need approval. You understand the reason behind the line, so you can hold it without escalation or defensiveness. The boundary isn't there to manage the other person. It's there to protect your own well-being. This is the difference between rules and boundaries. Rules try to control outcomes. Boundaries protect your well-being. And when that is clear, boundaries stop feeling harsh and start feeling protective. Number 5, self-trust is the bridge that makes this work. Self-trust isn't confidence. It's not bravado, and it's not believing you'll always get things right. Self-trust is the belief that when something matters, you will listen to yourself and follow through. Most people don't lose self-trust all at once. They lose it slowly, in small moments that don't seem important at the time. You notice discomfort, but you ignore it. You think about setting a boundary, but you delay it. You tell yourself, I'll deal with it later. Over time, those moments add up, and your brain learns a pattern. I don't honor myself when something feels off. And over time, that becomes your identity, the person who doesn't speak up. That's why people can be very aware and still feel very stuck. They know what they value, they know where the line is, but they don't trust themselves to hold it under pressure. So boundaries feel risky. Saying no feels heavy. Walking away feels like too much. Self-respect is built the same way it's lost, through small moments. Each time you follow through on something you know is right for you, even when it's uncomfortable, you strengthen it. You teach yourself that you can be relied on, that you won't abandon yourself just to keep things smooth. This is also why self-trust matters more than perfect wording. You don't need the right sentence if you trust yourself to act. You don't need approval if you trust your judgment. When self-trust is present, boundaries don't require force. They hold because you have your own back. Over time, this changes how you move through the world. You don't rush to explain. You don't panic when someone is disappointed. You don't overthink every decision. Not because you don't care, but because you trust yourself to respond in ways that protect your well-being. Number 6, pressure is the test of self-trust. Self-trust isn't tested when things are calm. It's tested when you feel pressure. Pressure to be liked. Pressure to keep the peace. Pressure to not disappoint someone. Pressure to not lose belonging. Pressure also shows up in quieter moments, when someone asks for more time than you're wanting to give. When they push for information you're not ready to share. When they expect access to your emotions, your availability, or your personal life just because they're close to you. None of that is dramatic, but it's where boundaries are actually tested. This is the moment where many people abandon themselves without realizing it, not because they don't know better, but because they don't trust themselves to hold the line if the other person reacts poorly. So they give in a little, they explain more than they want to, do more than they planned, promise things they already felt unsure about. When self-trust is weak, pressure feels urgent. It feels like something bad will happen if you don't act right now. But when self-trust is stronger, pressure still feels uncomfortable, but it doesn't feel dangerous. You can pause. You can take your time. You can choose a response instead of reacting to the feeling. This is where boundaries stop being about the other person entirely. They become about whether you believe that you can take care of yourself in that moment. Whether you trust yourself to tolerate discomfort without giving up something important to you. Holding a boundary under pressure doesn't mean the pressure disappears. It means you don't let it make the decision for you. And each time you do that, self-trust grows, quietly, steadily, making the next moment easier to handle. Number 7, what a healthy system feels like. When standards, boundaries, and self-trust work together, life doesn't become perfect, but it does become calmer. You're not constantly debating with yourself, replaying conversations, or wondering if you should have spoken up sooner. You notice what fits, you notice what doesn't, and you respond earlier before things pile up. This shows up in simple ways. Saying no doesn't feel like a personal failure. Walking away doesn't feel dramatic. Choosing privacy doesn't feel secretive. You don't engage in everything that asks for your attention, because you finally understand that attention is something that you give, not something that you owe. What changes most is the amount of emotional noise in your life. There's less resentment building quietly in the background, less second guessing, less need to justify yourself internally. You may still feel discomfort, but it passes more quickly because you're not ignoring it or fighting it. Over time, you start to feel more settled, and that settled feeling comes from knowing that when something matters, you will respond in a way that protects your well-being without chaos and without abandoning yourself. What I want you to understand is this is how you keep yourself. Standards are what you value about yourself. Boundaries are how you protect them. And self-trust is what allows you to use them, especially when it's uncomfortable. This isn't about being rigid or closed off. It's about understanding yourself well enough that you don't keep hurting yourself just to keep things smooth. And that understanding is what protects your future, quietly, but very powerfully. In the description below, you'll find a companion PDF with simple questions to help you notice how these ideas and patterns show up in real life, along with a written version of this video that you can read, follow along with, or return to later. Take care, and I will see you in the next one.